Not too long ago, I stumbled across something by accident, thanks to one of my wife's friends, that completely changed my world. It turns out my wife had been unfaithful, something that had been going on for the past 20 years. That discovery pushed me to make the hardest decision of my life, ending our marriage. Let me set the stage. My wife, Alice, is 44, and I'm 43. We've been married for 2 decades, and our story began way back in high school. She was a senior, and I was a junior. Even back then, I thought we had something special. When she left for college, we managed to keep our relationship going through those long-distance years. She was navigating her first 2 years of college while I was wrapping up high school and taking a year of classes at the local community college. Eventually, we ended up in the same city for school, and from that moment on, we were practically inseparable. We moved in together, started building a life, and tied the knot the summer after I graduated college. For the most part, I thought our marriage had been great, solid even. But all of that changed when I found out that during those 2 long-distance college years, Alice had been involved with several other men. It all came to light just after Christmas. We'd had a little get-together with a few of Alice's old college friends, a casual reunion at our place. It was a warm, easygoing evening filled with stories, laughs, and good food. As we sat around the table reminiscing, Alice casually mentioned that we'd known each other since high school. That was true, of course, but she left out the part where we'd been dating back then. One of her old roommates piped up, marveling at how incredible it was that we'd met so young, gone through our wild college years, and still ended up together. I played along, chuckling as I joked that I wasn't so sure Alice had been as wild as I had been. That's when the mood shifted. Her roommate started to share some story, one I wasn't privy to, but Alice jumped in, cutting her off. She said the topic was making her uncomfortable and steered the conversation elsewhere. Her reaction wasn't subtle, and it immediately set off alarms in my head. Something didn't feel right. I tried to smooth things over and added that we'd actually been dating since high school and stayed together all through her college years. The table went quiet after that, an awkward, heavy silence, and the rest of the evening felt tense. As we were saying our goodbyes, one of her other roommates pulled me aside. She lowered her voice and suggested, almost hesitantly, that I sit down with Alice and have a real, honest conversation about what went on during her college days. As we drove home from dinner that night, I couldn't shake the uneasiness gnawing at me. Something about the way her friend had hinted at secrets from her college years just wouldn't leave my mind. So, I decided to bring it up. Alice, I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could, what was your roommate talking about back there? She shrugged it off, barely meeting my eyes. Oh, nothing. It's not a big deal, she said casually, like I shouldn't even bother thinking about it. But I couldn't let it go. Look, I told her, if there's something I need to know, I'd rather you be honest with me now. She waved me off again, brushing my concerns aside like they were nothing. It's not important, she repeated, sounding almost irritated. That dismissive attitude of hers only made my suspicions grow. By the time we pulled into the driveway, my frustration was boiling over. Once we got inside, I decided enough was enough. Alice, I said firmly, I'm not doing this. If you're not ready to be honest with me, I'll give you space to figure it out. I'm going to stay at Ben's place for a while. Ben is my brother, and I knew he'd give me the room I needed to sort through whatever this was. I packed a small bag and left. The very next day, Alice showed up at Ben's, looking anxious and upset. She sat down, wringing her hands, and finally started to talk. She admitted she had slept with several men during those first 2 years of college. I didn't think it was a big deal at the time, she said, her voice trembling a little. We were long distance, and I didn't think our high school relationship would actually last. Her words hit me like a wrecking ball. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I pressed her for details, even though every fiber of my being didn't want to hear more. And that's when it got worse. She confessed to being with at least 10 different men. 10. That included at least 3 guys she'd introduced me to during my weekend visits back then, guys I thought were just her friends. To top it off, she admitted that one of them was someone she still kept in touch with. Hearing that was like a punch to the gut. Anger, sadness, betrayal, it all hit me at once, leaving me reeling. I couldn't imagine how she could do something like this, and then lie to me for decades. That's when I knew I couldn't do this anymore. I want a divorce, I told her, my voice steady but cold. I'll start the paperwork right away. And I did. On January 2nd, I began the process of ending our marriage. Alice kept trying to downplay everything. She made excuses, saying it was so long ago and that it shouldn't matter now. But her dismissive attitude only made me feel worse. This wasn't just about the cheating, it was about the lies, the disrespect, and the complete lack of regard for me or our relationship over all these years. Now, her family, and even some of mine, are trying to convince me not to throw away our marriage. It was just a few mistakes, they say. Everyone messes up. You should forgive her, especially after everything you've been through together. But to me, this isn't about a few mistakes. This was a pattern, a deliberate choice she made over and over again, hiding it all from me for years. Cheating on me with multiple men for 2 years? That's not something I can just brush aside. And the fact that she kept those men in her life, introducing them to me like they were nothing more than friends. That's a level of disrespect I can't accept. Our kids are 17 and 19 now, practically adults, and I believe they'll understand why I've decided to end the marriage. They've grown up seeing us as a loving couple, and I hope they'll see that this decision isn't about tearing apart our family but about preserving my own self-respect and integrity. Still, I feel like I'm losing my mind with the sheer number of people trying to convince me otherwise. Everywhere I turn, someone is telling me to let it go, to forgive and forget, to hold on to what we've built over the years. They act like I'm being unreasonable for not just focusing on the good times. But how am I supposed to do that? How can I think of those happy memories when they're all overshadowed now by the knowledge of what she did? It's not just about the cheating, it's about the web of deceit. It's about the lies she told me for decades and the fact that she kept those men in her life, introducing them to me as if nothing had ever happened. How am I supposed to trust her again? How am I supposed to even look at her the same way, knowing what she did and how dismissive she was when I confronted her? She brushed off my feelings like they didn't matter, and that, more than anything, crushed me. I'll admit, I keep questioning myself. Am I overreacting? Am I being too harsh? But then I remind myself of how I felt the moment she admitted to those affairs. That deep, searing pain. The anger and betrayal that consumed me. I think about the nights I've spent since then, replaying every interaction, wondering how she could bring me around those men and maintain friendships with them without a hint of guilt. This isn't something I can just move past. It's not a grudge, and it's not about revenge. It's a fundamental breach of trust that has shattered the foundation of our marriage. So, am I wrong for leaving? I don't think so. To me, this is about fighting for my dignity. It's about standing up for my right to be treated with honesty and respect. There are some lines in a relationship that, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. What's been eating at me even more is how Alice and a few of her friends have tried to normalize her behavior. They keep saying it's perfectly fine to sleep with other people in a long-distance relationship, like I'm the odd one out for staying faithful. It's like they're trying to make me feel crazy, like I'm the one who doesn't understand how things are supposed to work. That's why I'm writing this. I feel like I'm being gaslit, and I need an outside perspective. Living in a state with a waiting period before a divorce can be finalized has given me some time to think. Before I make things permanent, I wanted to hear if others see it the way I do, or if I'm just overthinking everything. After hearing some of the comments from others, I've noticed a small handful of people agreeing with my wife's claim that it's normal to sleep around in long-distance relationships. But thankfully, they seem to be in the minority. What frustrates me most is that our situation wasn't even the kind of long-distance relationship you'd expect that kind of behavior to justify. During those 2 years, we saw each other a couple of weekends every month. I lived only about 3 hours away from her college, so it wasn't like we were separated by an entire country or going months without being together. We made it work, or at least I thought we did. Looking back now, I can't help but think about the 3 guys I met during that time. All of them were introduced to me at parties, casual gatherings with no formal introductions. At the time, the topic of me being her boyfriend never really came up, so I have no idea if they even knew we were in a relationship. It's clear now that at least one of them didn't. One of these guys is still part of our lives because he ended up marrying a mutual friend from college. He wasn't some secret contact my wife was messaging behind my back. He's someone we've both stayed in touch with regularly over the years. After learning about my wife's infidelity, I decided to talk to him directly to get his side of the story. He was shocked. He told me he had no idea my wife and I were dating back then. He said if he'd known, he never would have gotten involved with her. Out of respect for me, he's since blocked her on social media and cut off all communication with her. Some people have questioned how her college roommates didn't figure out the timeline of our relationship earlier, like at our wedding. The answer to that lies in how we approached our marriage celebrations. My wife and I had a very small ceremony in Texas with just our close family. Later on, we went back to the East Coast and threw a big party for our friends. We skipped all the usual wedding traditions where couples share stories about how they met and their journey together. Because of that, her college roommates never really pieced together that we had started dating before she went to college. From what I can tell, they assumed we only got together during the year we both lived in the same city and moved in together after that. This gap in their understanding explains why they never questioned the timeline or suspected anything was off. At one point, I was genuinely open to trying therapy or putting in the work to save our marriage. I thought that maybe, with enough effort, we could find a way through this. But her constant insistence that what she did was perfectly normal, and that I'm overreacting has made that impossible for me to handle. It's not just the betrayal, it's her refusal to take accountability or acknowledge the pain her actions have caused me. I'm not sure how anyone could work through that when one person won't even admit there's a problem. My wife keeps telling me that sleeping with other people in a long-distance relationship is completely normal, and that I'm being unreasonable for feeling betrayed. What really stings is that the only time she showed any remorse, or even hinted at wanting to reconcile, was when I started filing the divorce paperwork. That brief moment of regret didn't last long. Within days, she went right back to her original stance, doubling down on the idea that she's in the right and that I'm just overreacting. This back and forth is why I feel like I'm being gaslit. To me, it's so clear that what she did was a massive betrayal, yet I've got her, and even a few others, trying to convince me it's no big deal. Her dismissive attitude only fuels my confusion and frustration. I've tried to explain to her, again and again, how deeply her infidelity hurt me. I hope she would listen, maybe even acknowledge the damage it caused. But instead, she brushes my feelings aside, treating them like some kind of overreaction to something trivial. It's as if she's trying to rewrite the rules of our relationship and expecting me to just go along with it. This constant invalidation of my emotions is maddening. I feel like I'm being manipulated into doubting my own perceptions and feelings. Her refusal to acknowledge the seriousness of her actions, and her attempts to normalize infidelity, just make the divide between us even wider. At this point, it's not just the cheating that's the problem. It's her complete inability to see why it's a big deal and why I feel so betrayed. I can't keep doing this. I need to protect my own mental and emotional well-being. Staying in a marriage where my feelings are dismissed and my trust has been destroyed isn't something I can do. I know I'm not overreacting. I'm standing up for myself, for my right to have a relationship built on respect and honesty. As for the kids, I have no intention of getting a paternity test unless they specifically ask for one themselves. I don't doubt for a second that they're biologically mine, and even if some tests showed otherwise, it wouldn't change how I feel about them. They've been my kids for 19 years, and they'll always be my kids. Nothing about my wife's infidelity changes that. I love them more than anything in this world, and that's not something that could ever be undone, not now, not ever. We were absolutely exclusively dating at the time. First of all, dating culture was a lot different 20 years ago. Exclusivity wasn't something you had to spell out, it was just the default for most people. There wasn't this open relationship or casual dating mindset that seems to be more common now. If you were with someone, you were with them, period. Second, before she left for college, we had a long, difficult conversation about whether we could make long-distance work. It wasn't some casual decision, we both committed to staying together, even though we knew it wouldn't be easy. That's why this hurts so much. I believed we had an understanding, a promise to stay faithful to each other. It wasn't an easy discussion, but I remember how adamant she was about us staying together when she left for college. She even joked that her dad would come after me if I started messing around with other girls at my school. At the time, we laughed about it, but that joke carried a lot of weight. It wasn't just humor. It was her way of making it clear how seriously she took our relationship and the expectation that we'd stay faithful to each other. A good example of how committed we were to being exclusive happened during my senior prom. Since she was away at college, she couldn't come with me. I suggested going with a platonic female friend, thinking it was harmless, but her reaction surprised me. She got really upset about the idea, and it became clear how much our relationship meant to her. She didn't want me going with anyone else, even as friends. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, so I ended up skipping prom altogether and spent the evening talking to her instead. While we might not have explicitly sat down and said, "We're exclusive," all of these things, her comments, her reaction to prom, and the way we navigated our relationship before she left for college, made it abundantly clear that we were committed to each other. The expectation of fidelity was just understood in the way we behaved and talked about our future together. After the reunion dinner, when I followed up with the friend who had suggested I have an honest conversation with my wife, I was blindsided yet again. This friend told me that 10 guys might actually be on the lower end of the number my wife had been with during those 2 years. She also mentioned there had been at least one pregnancy scare during that time, something I had absolutely no idea about. To be honest, the exact number of guys doesn't even matter to me anymore. What truly hurts, and what I can't get past, is my wife's complete inability to understand why her actions were so wrong and why I feel so deeply betrayed. It would be different, maybe even salvageable, if she showed any genuine remorse or real effort to make things right. But she hasn't. Instead, she's spent most of our conversations dismissing my feelings, telling me I'm overreacting to what she keeps calling totally normal behavior. She hasn't once expressed regret, or even tried to acknowledge the pain she caused, not until I told her I was filing for divorce. Only then, when she realized how serious I was, did she suddenly get defensive and angry. But even in that moment, her concern wasn't about the hurt she'd inflicted or the state of our relationship. It was about the consequences she'd face because of the divorce. It felt like damage control, not an attempt to repair the years of deception. Her lack of remorse, her unwillingness to take responsibility, and her dismissal of my feelings have all reinforced what I already knew deep down. She doesn't grasp the depth of her betrayal. And without that understanding, I just can't see a way to move forward together. It's not just the infidelity itself that broke me, it's the ongoing disregard for my feelings and what our marriage was supposed to stand for. Her dismissive attitude, even when confronted with something this serious, left me with no choice but to move forward with the divorce. At this point, I believe we can manage co-parenting fairly well. Our kids are older, and I've been saving for their college and post-high school expenses for years. Custody and financial issues shouldn't present any major challenges. We're both financially stable, with good incomes, and I trust we can approach this part of the process maturely. I've even left the door open for therapy, though at this stage it's less about saving our marriage and more about learning how to co-parent effectively, and finding some form of closure. That said, I've already taken concrete steps to move forward with the separation. I hired a lawyer to draft an intent to separate document, which was sent to her via certified mail. To be clear, this isn't the same as officially filing for divorce with the state. It's more of a preliminary step to make sure she has the chance to hire her own lawyer if she wants to contest anything. The divorce process itself will probably take several months, but I've made it clear that this is happening. For now, I haven't fully moved out of our house. I've been staying with my brother while I figure out a more permanent living situation. For some context, the dinner with her friends, the one where all of this started, was on December 26th. That night, I went to my brother's house to cool off and give her some time to reflect. Over the next 4 or 5 days, We had multiple conversations about what had happened. It became painfully clear that she didn't think she'd done anything wrong. If she had shown even an ounce of remorse, regret, or basic concern for how I was feeling, I might have reconsidered or at least taken some time before making a decision. But her dismissive attitude left me no room to do that. So, I found a divorce lawyer, and we quickly completed the standard intent to separate agreements, which were sent to her the same day. To be honest, I'm not even sure if my state has an official legal concept of separation, but that doesn't really matter. What's important is that I've made it crystal clear to her that this process is moving forward. I've started the necessary steps to untangle our lives, and I'm not looking back. Update 1. Let's get into what I discovered about her college years. After several counseling sessions with my wife and a couple of candid conversations with her former college roommates, I learned that some of them had suspected something was off back in those days. They mentioned that certain situations seemed odd and likely involved cheating, but my wife had assured them that everything was fine. She told them we had both gone through wild phases in college, but worked it all out before getting married. Because of this, they never felt the need to bring anything up. One of the roommates, the one who had pulled me aside during the dinner, confessed that she'd always felt uneasy about it. She was uncomfortable knowing my wife had clearly never been honest with me and believed I deserved to know the truth. Her decision to tell me was the spark that set all of this in motion. As for the men my wife was involved with, I've come to understand that the introductions to some of them weren't entirely intentional. For example, one of the men she slept with ended up dating, and eventually marrying, a mutual friend of ours from college. This was the guy she remained in contact with over the years. From what I've gathered, it wasn't some secretive side relationship. He was simply part of our social circle due to his marriage to our mutual friend. In counseling, my wife initially tried to shift some of the blame onto me, suggesting that I had inadvertently pushed her into situations where we would encounter these men. She claimed that when I visited her during college, she had planned for us to stay in her room or spend time together privately. However, I was the one who expressed interest in experiencing college parties since I'd missed out on that part of life during high school and community college. Because of this, we ended up at parties where some of these guys were present. She admitted she hadn't expected me to meet them but felt she couldn't avoid it since they were often at these gatherings. While I still see it as incredibly disrespectful that she brought me into those environments without disclosing the history, I recognize now that it wasn't as if she deliberately paraded me in front of them. The more I uncover, the more this situation feels like a complex web of half-truths and omissions. Her friends suspected something but never intervened, likely because they believed her narrative about us working through it all. Meanwhile, my wife carefully maintained this facade for years. It's a lot to process, knowing how much was hidden from me, not just by her, but also by people I trusted. Even with these revelations, it's clear the root issue isn't just the infidelity itself, it's the years of dishonesty and the profound lack of respect for me and our relationship. Most of our therapy sessions have focused on one key issue: why I see her infidelity as a significant betrayal, while she didn't initially feel the same way. Early on, she tried to rationalize her actions by pointing out that none of the men she slept with were in actual relationships with her. According to her, these were mostly one-night stands or friends with benefits. In her view, they didn't count as a big deal since they weren't romantic relationships. Her words, not mine. From my perspective, the nature of those relationships was completely irrelevant. We had never agreed that any kind of physical involvement with other people was acceptable. On the contrary, she had actively discouraged me from doing the same during that time. The double standard was blatant, and it only deepened my sense of betrayal. Over the course of 2 therapy sessions, and after she consulted with some of her friends, my wife began to shift her perspective. She now acknowledges that her actions were a violation of the trust and commitment our relationship was built on. This shared understanding has helped us move beyond heated arguments and into more honest and productive conversations. This change in our dynamic gives me some hope, not for saving our marriage, but for building a healthier relationship as co-parents. Being able to openly discuss the past is an important step toward finding closure and navigating the complexities of raising our kids together. While the idea of reconciling feels far-fetched, I believe that this newfound honesty is critical for our children's well-being and for establishing a solid co-parenting arrangement. Now, here's why I'm 100% committed to getting a divorce. 2 pivotal realizations made it clear that our marriage is beyond repair. The first revelation took me back about 10 years ago. We had hit a rough patch in our marriage and went nearly 2 years without any intimacy. She told me at the time that our physical relationship was becoming stale and monotonous. I took that seriously and made an effort to bring some excitement into our marriage, not anything extreme, just light roleplay and a few novelty items to spice things up. However, it soon became clear that she was still fixated on intimate experiences from her college days, experiences she's uncomfortable discussing. She wanted me to recreate those experiences, but when I did, it only made her feel awkward and guilty, as it reminded her of the other men she had been with. This contradiction, insisting those experiences were meaningless, yet still feeling affected by them, tells me they were more significant to her than she's willing to admit. The second revelation came when she confessed to flirting with coworkers during business trips after the pandemic. Although she claims nothing physical happened, it escalated to the point where she actually went on a date with one of her male colleagues. For me, that was the absolute deal-breaker. These 2 revelations shattered whatever trust one had left. The first issue showed me that past experiences were still haunting our present, despite her insistence that they were insignificant. The second issue revealed that, even after everything we had been through, she was still willing to cross boundaries. These factors made it clear to me that there was no hope for salvaging our marriage. We've already informed our children about the divorce, explaining that it stems from some bad decisions made during college, decisions we've been unable to move past. During that conversation, my 19-year-old, who is currently in college, directly asked if I had been unfaithful to her while she was away. This question caught my wife off guard, but she bravely admitted to our children that she was the one who had cheated. We both agreed to stop sharing any more details with the kids. It's important to shield them from the painful aspects of our past. I reassured them that, despite the separation, both of us remain fully committed to being there for them. I emphasized that we're in therapy to handle the divorce in the best way possible for our family's well-being. I also told them that if they ever need to talk about the situation, whether with us or a therapist, they have my full support. I want them to know they can express their feelings and seek help without hesitation. Their emotional health is a top priority for both of us, and we're doing everything we can to navigate this difficult time together, as a family. We've started working with a mediator to figure out the best way to proceed with the divorce. Unless something changes, it seems like we'll be able to part ways amicably. Both of us are financially stable, there's no significant debt, and with our kids being older, custody isn't a major concern. While the past few months have been tough, I'm managing. I'm actually thankful that my last post gained so much attention. It validated my feelings and pushed me to seek counseling with my wife. To be fair, my 19-year-old daughter has had her own difficult relationships. She's been hurt by boyfriends who either cheated on her or abruptly left her for someone else. Given her past experiences with untrustworthy men, it's understandable why her first thought might have been that I was the one who cheated. Adding to her suspicion is the fact that I was the one who left the house. In her eyes, seeing her father leave might have seemed like an admission of guilt or wrongdoing. Her experiences have understandably shaped her perspective, making it easier for her to believe that I could be at fault. When cheating came up, my wife made it clear that she was the one who had been unfaithful. Honestly, I'm not too concerned about the narrative. From what I can tell, my wife hasn't said anything negative about me to the kids. Moreover, considering her recent admissions of flirting and cheating, along with her readiness to file for a joint, amicable divorce after just 6 weeks and 3 counseling sessions, it seems she was more prepared to move on than I was. Her willingness to walk away from a 20-year marriage so quickly makes the logistical aspects of the divorce easier, but it still stings a bit. It's hard to see her moving on so easily when I'm struggling with letting go. I'm fairly certain she's already looking for a new partner. During our meeting with the divorce mediator, she explicitly mentioned that we are still legally married until the divorce is finalized, and that any infidelity before that date could jeopardize our amicable settlement. It felt a bit ironic, given that the foundation of our divorce is infidelity. However, my soon-to-be ex-wife seemed visibly annoyed when the topic came up. I also suspect that my current living situation, staying in the guest room, might be hindering her prospects of moving on quickly. Despite everything that happened before he was born, my ex-wife did care for and love our son for 17 years. As the divorce proceedings have moved forward, I've noticed my son spending more time with her, which gives me hope that they'll eventually reconcile. This has been a challenging time for all of us, but I'm optimistic that, with time, they'll be able to rebuild their bond. In the end, we divided our retirement funds and investments equally, 50-50. My wife had always liked the house, while I never felt much attachment to it, so she kept it along with most of the furnishings. To balance things out, she took out a mortgage to pay me back for half of the equity and half of the estimated replacement value of the furniture. Most of the other items were easy to split. She kept her car, I kept mine, and we divided our personal belongings like my music gear and her hobby equipment, along with clothing and personal effects. For anything that was more difficult to divide, we agreed to sell it and split the profits. Thankfully, we had documented most of our valuable items and electronics for an insurance rider we added to our home insurance a few years ago, which made this process smoother. Things have been going well for me personally. Both of my kids spend most of their time at my place, and we've maintained a close relationship, which was my biggest concern during the divorce. I'm relieved and grateful that this bond remains strong. I've moved into a new house that I truly love, a place that feels like a fresh start. In a nod to my midlife crisis, I traded in my old minivan for a sleek Lexus LC 550, and surprisingly, it's brought me a lot of joy. On another positive note, a woman at work, someone from a different department, so we don't interact directly, invited me out for a coffee date. I was upfront with her, explaining that I'm not ready to date just yet. She was understanding and graciously offered to take a rain check, expressing her willingness to go out with me when I'm ready. Her invitation was a pleasant surprise. She's incredibly smart, has a great sense of humor, and our professional roles are distant enough that there's no awkwardness at work. My ex and I are still attending couples counseling, but now it's focused on achieving closure for our marriage and ensuring we can co-parent effectively. At the end of the day, I'm doing my best to come to terms with the end of our marriage. I've been attending therapy on my own, in addition to our couples sessions, to help me cope with the situation. Mentally, I'm bracing myself for the likelihood of running into the coworker she dated, but I'm hopeful that I'll find a new place and move out before the divorce is finalized. If everything goes smoothly with the mediator, we should be divorced by summer. By then, I'll have my own place, and she'll be free to date whoever she wants. Update 2. My wife and I have finalized our divorce, and everything is now official. We managed to have an uncontested, amicable divorce with minimal disagreements. Our lawyers collaborated to draft the plan through mediation, and a judge signed off on it a few weeks ago. Ultimately, the process was straightforward. The only significant complication was related to our 17-year-old, who was adamant about staying with me due to the deterioration of their relationship with my ex-wife. Initially, my wife resisted, ready to challenge the uncontested divorce. However, our son made it clear that she could either allow him a few months to process and rebuild their relationship or force him to stay with her until he turned 18 and risk never seeing him again. Although I felt my son's stance was a bit harsh, it did prompt my wife to back down. We moved forward with the agreement that I would have primary physical custody until his birthday later this year. Throughout this period, I've encouraged my son to remain open to mending his relationship with his mother. Despite everything that happened before he was born, my ex-wife did care for and love our son for 17 years. As the divorce proceedings have moved forward, I've noticed my son spending more time with her, which gives me hope that they'll eventually reconcile. This has been a challenging time for all of us, but I'm optimistic that, with time, they'll be able to rebuild their bond. In the end, we divided our retirement funds and investments equally, 50-50. My wife had always liked the house, while I never felt much attachment to it, so she kept it along with most of the furnishings. To balance things out, she took out a mortgage to pay me back for half of the equity and half of the estimated replacement value of the furniture. Most of the other items were easy to split. She kept her car, I kept mine, and we divided our personal belongings like my music gear and her hobby equipment, along with clothing and personal effects. For anything that was more difficult to divide, we agreed to sell it and split the profits. Thankfully, we had documented most of our valuable items and electronics for an insurance rider we added to our home insurance a few years ago, which made this process smoother. Things have been going well for me personally. Both of my kids spend most of their time at my place, and we've maintained a close relationship, which was my biggest concern during the divorce. I'm relieved and grateful that this bond remains strong. I've moved into a new house that I truly love, a place that feels like a fresh start. In a nod to my midlife crisis, I traded in my old minivan for a sleek Lexus LC550, and surprisingly, it's brought me a lot of joy. On another positive note, a woman at work, someone from a different department, so we don't interact directly, invited me out for a coffee date. I was upfront with her, explaining that I'm not ready to date just yet. She was understanding and graciously offered to take a rain check, expressing her willingness to go out with me when I'm ready. Her invitation was a pleasant surprise. She's incredibly smart, has a great sense of humor, and our professional roles are distant enough that there's no awkwardness at work. My ex and I are still attending couples counseling, but now it's focused on achieving closure for our marriage and ensuring we can co-parent effectively. These counseling sessions have been invaluable for processing everything and maintaining a healthy, positive environment despite the circumstances. However, they've also confirmed that divorce was the right decision. Through our discussions, it's become evident that my wife began dating as soon as the divorce process started. That, along with her actions, showed me that whatever love we had was already fading. I'm pretty sure the coworker she claimed was just a friend even dropped her off at our recent session. Surprisingly, this didn't really upset me, which was a clear sign that I too was ready to move on from the marriage. In the end, healing from the betrayal will take time, but I feel like I'm making good progress. I can confidently say that the divorce was the right choice. Over the past 4 months, I've shed more tears than in the last 20 years combined, but for the past month, I've genuinely felt good about myself for the first time in a long while. I'm enjoying my newfound independence, staying busy helping my 17-year-old prepare for college in the fall, and looking forward to a coffee date with a smart, funny woman in a month or two. The journey through our divorce taught me the value of honest communication. Looking back, I wish we had been more transparent with each other from the start. Honesty could have prevented some of the pain we both ended up feeling. It's a lesson I'll carry forward in all my future relationships, romantic or otherwise. Most importantly, I've discovered the strength within myself to rebuild and move on. Despite the heartache, I've started to feel genuinely good about myself again.